CJAM 99.1 FM, now reaching higher ground in Windsor, Detroit with 4 times the power.
Who are the great police?
Here you come again, and you say that you're my friend, but I know why you're here. She wants to know how I feel. Tell her that I'm happy. Tell her that I'm gay. Tell her I wouldn't have it any other way.
Hello, and welcome to The Shake Up. This is a show that explores and honors the LGBTQ+ history of Windsor, Essex. My name is Emerson McIntosh, and I would like to start by acknowledging and honoring the history of this land. This area is the traditional land of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, the nations that comprise the Three Fires Confederacy, also known as the Council of Three Fires. I would like to acknowledge as well the spiritual and physical connection that these nations have to this land, and the ways in which they have been dispossessed of this land through the processes of colonialism. To acknowledge as a settler my responsibility to act to respect treaty relationships, which in this area includes the McKee Treaty in Session 66, and to work to address the harm caused by the colonial government through untrustworthy, dishonest actions. I would like to read from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Number 14. We call upon the federal government to enact an Aboriginal Languages Act that incorporates the following principles. Aboriginal languages are a fundamental and valued element of Canadian culture and society, and there is an urgency to preserve them. Aboriginal language rights are reinforced by the treaties. The federal government has a responsibility to provide sufficient funds for Aboriginal language revitalization and preservation. The preservation, revitalization, and strengthening of Aboriginal languages and cultures are best managed by Aboriginal people and communities. Funding for Aboriginal language initiatives must reflect the diversity of Aboriginal languages. OPIRG, which stands for the Ontario Public Interest Research Group, of which there are 11 public interest research groups across Ontario, furthers the cause of social and environmental justice. OPIRG is funded through full-time undergraduate and graduate students. OPIRG Windsor was re-established in 1994, and they've been working toward justice here for over 20 years. On a personal note, I encountered OPIRG first when I met out on campus at the university, which was supported and kept alive by the efforts of OPIRG. Out on campus was the LGBTQ+ community group at UWindsor, and the predecessor to today's Campus Pride. OPIRG is currently located in Dillon Hall 252, and like many student-based groups has been threatened by the Student Choice Initiative. Consider opting into funding as a way of keeping social justice on the forefront at UWindsor. So this is The Shake Up. I'm Emerson, and I'm here with my co-host Derek.
Hi there, Janine. So could you start, Janine, with your name, your full name, the pronouns that you use, and any language that you use to describe yourself?
Okay, Ms. Janine, Janine, Kissner, Kissner.
And do you like to use the words like a lesbian, gay, or a woman lover sort of to describe yourself? What's kind of language that you use to identify?
Oh, what kind of language? Oh, bisexual.
Bisexual, cool.
You mentioned working at the AIDS Committee of Windsor. What was that like? Were you there when it started?
Well, I was one of the founding members of the AIDS Committee of Windsor. I'm not sure if, Glenda told you about that, but I was one of the people that there was 5 of us. There was, Jim Monk and Beth Lister. I don't know if you know those names. Steve Lowe. There was a couple people that they actually got the AIDS Committee of Windsor started a little bit before. They were involved a little bit before me. And this was about 1980, 86, 87. and I started volunteering there. And we literally didn't even have an office. I mean, it was started out of someone's apartment. And this was, of course, even before the AIDS crisis was well known. I mean, they were still calling it GRID, which was gay-related immune deficiency. And the word, HIV and AIDS was they were just beginning to kind of define it as that. And it wasn't until 88, 89, where we actually were able to get funding from the government and able to get an office and, hire staff and get things going. There was a lot of secrecy around HIV at the time, as you could imagine. I mean, if you can imagine that we wouldn't even write people's names on their files, like we actually had numbers instead of names. I mean, people would lose their jobs. They wouldn't be able to get a doctor, a dentist. They were treated horribly by the medical community back then. And so if anyone found out that they were HIV positive or if they had AIDS, it could really, ruin their lives. And this is even before anonymous testing. So, it was a really difficult time dealing with all of that because our job was to advocate for people with HIV and AIDS. And, I mean, I remember having huge, sessions and educational sessions for doctors and dentists and, trying to kind of convince them that as long as they use universal precautions, you're not going to get HIV or AIDS. And knowing that someone's HIV positive is better than even not knowing because, somebody could not know they have it. And if you don't use universal precautions, you could have it transmitted. And people didn't know how it was transmitted either. I mean, a lot of people still thought you could get it from breathing the same air or using the same, towel or something as somebody with HIV. So there was a lot of people that died. We had the last year that I was there, which I think was 1992 or 1993. I think I went to 70 funerals that year.
Wow.
And so things have changed a lot since then. I mean, that was 25 years ago. I mean, people aren't really dying of AIDS anymore. I mean, certainly there are people dying of AIDS, but HIV is a manageable chronic infection. There are medications that we didn't have back then. It's not necessarily the death sentence that it used to be. And I think still a lot of stigma, but it's better.
When you reference the stigma, I was wondering, what was the reaction of the larger community when you said, we're going to be starting this? Was there secrecy when you were even starting the group? Or
Certainly what I've already said, which is there was a whole lot of secrecy. And people would literally not even want to come into our office. If I was to see them, I would meet them at their house or even meet them somewhere in public where, nobody would know that we were meeting. So people didn't tell their families. My parents, for example, wouldn't tell any of their friends that I worked at the AIDS committee. They would say I worked for the Canadian Cancer Society instead. I mean, that's how bad it was back then. And the larger community, I talked a bit about the medical community. The larger community was, there was an outcry. When we would rent an office, our first office was in the back of a motorcycle shop. It was the only place that would rent to us.
Wow.
Even the medical community, I remember, if you remember the old Hotel View Hospital, you used to go in the front doors off of Olette, and off to the left there was a little ward, and that was where they put people who were sick with AIDS. And I remember going in there and you'd see the nurses walking around literally in spacesuits. And the housekeeping staff would refuse to go into the rooms of people, and the dietary staff would leave the tray outside the door and wouldn't even bring it in.
I've been hearing a lot about the ways that people had to take care of their friends, and that chosen family actually became a really powerful concept at the time because people had to take care of each other. And I was wondering, what... I also was hearing about how the AIDS Committee of Windsor had dances and was both advocacy group, an educational group, and a social group. And I was wondering if you could speak to any of those components as well.
Well, we had to do a lot of, advocacy, education, public relations within, not just within the gay community, but within the larger community. But our focus was men who were having sex with men because they were the ones who we needed to educate. And in terms of advocacy, our advocacy, as I said, was a lot of times just getting care for people. And certainly our advocacy was with families. I mean, families would come in and, not every family would reject someone because they had HIV or AIDS, but didn't have a lot of information about it. So where else would you get it? They came in to our, organization to get that information. And we were the ones that had it. And so we did a lot of advocacy and education with a lot of different groups. We had a program called the Buddy Program, which was circles of care, where people would, when someone was dying or when someone became very ill, oftentimes they were thrown out of their apartment, they had lost their job. We would bring groups of people around them to care for them when they were dying. And there was certainly not, groups out there that were willing to do that. So the gay community really stepped up.
What was the decision like when you said they started in an apartment and it was like it sounded like a very small group? What were the conversations like when you were first starting, and how did you decide the scope of the group?
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a couple of women, and there was a couple of, it was mostly gay men that were involved, and I think some of them, they were older gay men, and they had seen some of their friends who were dying, and they were outraged that nobody was doing anything about it. So, and I think they really had some vision. Jim Monk is somebody who has been an activist in the gay community for years and years, and I remember it was in his apartment that we had these conversations mostly, and there was just a lot of outrage that nobody was doing anything about it, and there was a conversation to kind of develop the vision. What are we going to do? If nobody else is going to do anything about it, we're going to have to do something about it. And I think that's true for most places, even New York, any of the larger cities. It took a long time for the government to get their crap together and respond to the crisis. And they didn't see it as a crisis. And it was affecting, I hate to sort of say this, but it was affecting, a group of people that were not necessarily standing up for themselves. But they were also invisible. They were men who went to doctors just like any heterosexual man. But to go to your doctor, say you're gay, there wasn't gay-related sort of medicine at the time. It was more, there was a lot of silence. And, as the old saying goes, silence equals death. And I think a lot of people that were involved in the beginning kind of had that vision and knew that was what, this wasn't going to go away. And in fact, it was, going to become a crisis. And then I think in terms of, the women that were there was some question about, there were some lesbian women, straight women, bisexual women, other women who really had a lot of conversations about whether or not we should even be involved. Working in an organization as a bisexual woman or a lesbian woman, that is, at the time, it was mostly men, gay men. Obviously, we made the decision that, yes, they're part of our community and we need to be involved. But I think a lot of lesbian women in particular backed away from that kind of work, partly because I think they wanted to go back to working in their own community, if that makes sense. And that's happening in a lot of communities most recently.
Was it concern over stepping in someone else's place, or was it about just that's not my problem, or just like not feeling like connected to it?
I think the conversation was really more of a conversation about, as a feminist, is this something I should be doing? Not that we didn't care, or not that we didn't think it was important, or that the crisis wasn't going to affect us. We had a lot of gay male friends. We were seeing our community, and we considered them a part of our community. We saw that as being extremely important. But the conversations were really more of a feminist conversation, is, should women be taking care of men as we have been?
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with more LGBTQ plus history in Windsor, Essex, brought to you by the Ontario Public Interest Research Group through the University of Windsor. You're listening on CJAM 99.1 FM every Friday at 4 p.m.
Since 1983, CJAM has broadcast on the FM dial from the University of Windsor campus. We represent the student body through campus-based news and sports programming. We highlight events in and around campus. Students come to CJAM to learn the basics of radio for free, and because of this training and experience, many move on to careers in broadcasting. Donate to the CJAM Emergency Fundraiser at cjam.ca or call in at 519-971-3630 in Windsor and anywhere else at 1-855-344-2526. CJAM 99.1 FM is reaching higher ground in Windsor, Detroit, and worldwide at cjam.ca.
Love isn't everything, not what the poets sing, that all else but loving is vain. Love doesn't make you think. No, love isn't water to drink. Love isn't everything. Love isn't slumbering or shelter from cold or from rain. Love isn't rich man's gold, nor bread when the heart has grown old. Love doesn't make your breakfast, and love doesn't change your bed. Love doesn't take the thoughts from books and put 'em in your head. No, love isn't everything. Can't put the spell on spring or paint all the leaves in the fall. But for lack of love, I'm dying, that's all.
That was Lucy Yegi-Azarian with Love Isn't Everything from her album Blue Heaven. Now back to our show.
Beth, I have a question. I've kind of been resonating with this this theme that I think I've picked up a bit in our conversation here. We were talking about some of the hardship, right, of the work that you were going through with a society that maybe wasn't at all willing to have this conversation or to address it. And I mean, that's something I think that a lot of people feel still today with, you know, many different issues and human rights kind of campaigns or even environmental, you know, justice sort of movement happening now of kind of falling on an unsympathetic audience or a society that's not really looking to have that conversation to address that crisis. Could you talk a little bit about sort of like, I guess, the emotional toll or just how that made you feel doing this work and really struggling to get the larger society to see this as an issue that they needed to address as well and to stop being, you know, so prejudiced and discriminatory in the way that they were providing care?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, for me, I'm you know, this is something I can't imagine not doing, being an activist. I mean, you know, I'm an activist now, but not around HIV or AIDS. I you know, was until, well, it's not that I'm not, it's just that I don't work in that field anymore, and but I'm still an activist, and it's really, really difficult, the toll that it takes. I mean, there are times, for example, the World Health Organization just acknowledged that burnout is a real thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there were so many people that got burnt out working in the AIDS field that, you know, that never, ever recovered from that. And I think it's really difficult. I mean, no matter what issue you pick, whether it's, you know, gun violence, whether it's poverty, you know, even in my current, you know, like I'm a poverty activist, and it's difficult. I mean, people don't, you know, at parties, you're not exactly the fun person when you're, you know, talking, not that I talk about poverty all the time at parties, but I think you have to acknowledge that it's, I mean, in order to be a good activist, you have to be able to win over people's hearts and minds. And in order to do that, you have to be kind of really on top of things. I mean, there are times when I've had people ask me questions I didn't know the answer to, and I lost the argument, and And it's like when people are willing to engage with you and you are trying to change, the way they see things, it's a really, it's a real commitment. I mean, you have to really be on top of things. You have to really know what you're talking about. And that takes a lot out of you. And there is a real, emotional toll when, first of all, it's not a fun topic. People don't want to talk about it. And even when they do, I mean, you really, really, really need to know what you're talking about. And that takes a toll. And you need to, I think, acknowledge, all of us as activists need to acknowledge that, we need to take time for ourselves. So we need to acknowledge that burnout does exist, that compassion fatigue does exist. And it's completely okay to take a break and not, be out there campaigning for whatever it is you're campaigning for all the time. And I think, as activists, that community is beginning to wake up to some of that stuff. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's great. No, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Would you like to speak to the activism you're doing now? Like, are there any causes you'd like to plug for our listeners to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'd love to. I co-founded a charity here in Windsor called Feeding Windsor. I don't know if you've heard of us.
Yes.
But we're...
Yes, I've heard of Feeding Windsor.
Oh, good. Excellent. Well, we've been around now for going on 5 years this coming fall. And we started at... both my husband and I worked at the mission, the downtown mission. I'm a social worker. He worked as a cook there. And we decided that when we left the mission, we weren't happy with what was going on there. So we founded Feeding Windsor, which is an organization that does two things. One is we provide free community services in the community. So we have 11 locations around the city where we provide lunch programs, free community meals. We have a food club where people pay, $25 to get $50 worth of food. We have a pet food bank. So we're trying to kind of meet. We're located at New Song Church, which is down on Drouillard, which is a very, as you know, a lot of low-income people live in this neighborhood. But we're all over the city, and we have a partnership with the Windsor Community Housing Corporation. So we have programs in their buildings like 920 Olette on Rivard. And then the biggest thing that we do is we have a partnership with Homeless and Housing Services for the City of Windsor, and we there's no homeless shelter for families in the city, and so there's a hotel on Howard where they place the families, and we provide the food for those families. And the money that we generate from that provides funding for all of our other programs. And then we also run a training program for people who have severe barriers to employment, and we train them to get their first job in the culinary arts. And we have a diner, which is on Howard Avenue as well. It's run as a social enterprise, and that's where we do our training. So I don't think I missed anything.
What's the name
anyway,
of the diner?
We do a lot of that kind of work. So that's number one. Number two is we're anti-poverty activists, so we're involved in every aspect of anti-poverty work here in the city, and meaning going to City Hall, trying to get policy changes to happen on a federal, provincial, and municipal level. And we're out there, advocating for changes to ODSP and OW rates, everything from that to, social housing, anything that's related to, we worked with Pathways to Potential before they closed down, and we work with other organizations here in the city to try to have a voice whenever possible.
Thank you, Janine. I have two follow-up questions. One is, what's the name of the diner? And the second one is, if people are feeling particularly inspired, how can they support you? Is there a place they can volunteer or contribute money or other resources?
Yep. Well, the diner is... do you know where on Howard Avenue they have a hotel called the I Check In?
Yes.
Well, there's a restaurant attached to that called the I Dine In, and that's now called the Feeding Windsor Diner. But when you drive down Howard Avenue, you'll still see a sign that says I Dine In, just because we haven't changed the sign yet. But that's where the diner is, so that's a social enterprise. So when you go in, any money that you spend in the diner, like if you have breakfast in the diner, all that money goes towards our services. It's a not-for-profit social enterprise. And on the other half of the diner is where where people sort of grab and go. People come in and get their food, and they can eat in the diner as well. But there's a hotel attached to it, so it's a perfect kind of marriage of, you know, people being able to not have to go too far to get their meals because they're staying in a hotel. And then, as far as supporting Feeding Windsor, I mean, donating money. Every charity needs money, right? We run our charity on we're not interested in developing infrastructure. All of the money that we raise, or the money we get from the city contract and so on, goes towards our programs. We have very few staff, and all of the staff we have come from this area. So we give people opportunities that come from low-income areas and the areas that we work in to actually work in those. If we have any paid staff at all in any of our programs, they come from those particular areas. And so people can volunteer. We use volunteers in every single one of our programs. And if they wanted to get in touch with us, they can get in touch with us through New Song Church, and we have an extension. And they can leave a message, and we can call them back. We need volunteers in every single one of our programs, including the pet food bank. The pet food bank is a perfect opportunity for people. If they don't have, a lot of money, they can donate pet food to the pet food bank. We run twice a week, and we give pet food to people who live on a low income from anywhere in the city. And we've recently partnered with Street Health, which is has that van that goes around to LaSalle and Essex and Leamington and all out in the county. And so we partnered with them, so we give pet food to people through their van. And then we also have our pet food bank here. So we have the mobile pet food bank, and then our pet food bank here at 999 Joulard. And we provide food to anyone anywhere in the city who's living on a low income. We don't ask for proof of income or ID. We just ask people to be honest with us, and we provide up to a week's worth of food for people that are struggling with, being able to buy pet food. So people can donate pet food, they can donate money, we love that, or they can volunteer.
Well, thank you so much, Janine, for speaking with us today. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Shake Up. For more LGBTQ plus history, please tune in on Fridays at 4 p.m. to CJAM 99.1 FM, or check us out online on YouTube at Shake Up Radio. Want to hear more about the show? Please check us out on Facebook, email us at shakeupradio@operg.org, or call us at 519-253-3000, extension 3872. If you would like to volunteer, we are always looking for more people who are passionate about LGBTQ plus history in Windsor. Please email, call, or come by the Operg office in Dillon 252.
That's all I got to say, my friend. Now we better say goodbye. I think you'd better go right now, or you might see me cry. But when you see my baby, this is what you say. Tell her I wouldn't have it any other way. No other way. I wouldn't have it, baby. No